Hello everybody. We're so glad to see you this morning. Welcome to Thursday PD. My name is Shannon Moore, and I'm here with Gary and James, and I'll allow them to introduce themselves in a minute. But today we are talking all things hybrid learning. And I know there's so many individuals out there who are making the transition from virtual to hybrid, or they've been in hybrid for a while. And so wherever you're at, whatever platform you're teaching on, all of that jazz, please add it into the chat. Let us have a conversation, ask us questions, and hopefully we can answer them. And if not, we'll figure it out. So without further ado, I'm going to let my friends here introduce themselves. Gary, you want to give us some insight about who you are? And then would you like to maybe explain, when you hear the term hybrid learning or hybrid teaching experience, what is it exactly, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah. Hi, good evening. Good evening from the Philippines. I'm Gary Garcia. I am excited for tonight's topic because we haven't, here in the Philippines, we haven't done this setup, the hybrid. But as I understand it, hybrid means combining the online, and there will be time that you are in person in the classroom. So I'm excited to learn from James. James, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I've been teaching hybrid for a little while now, and before that I was doing fully distance, and now we've gone to hybrid, and each one brings new challenges, and I think we're going to talk about those quite a lot in the future, so we'll go through that. But yeah, I'm probably the one who's done every scenario one way or another, and yeah, hybrid is the biggest challenge for teachers, I've got to say. Teachers thought distance learning was challenging. Hybrid is another step up.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I hear. That's what I hear from all of the educators that I'm talking to around the world. And if you're on Twitter at all and you simply put in the hashtag hybrid learning or hybrid teaching, you're going to see so many different questions, challenges, celebrations, because every single, experience has a celebration moment too. So I encourage you to check that out if you're looking for more resources. But we are going to dive in today, and hopefully we can get some insight. Teaching is teaching, and supporting is supporting. And so I think even though, Gary and myself haven't really experienced that hybrid scenario, I think, we have enough skills, experiences, and hopefully we can lend to the conversation as well.
And I think one of the things that you two are really good at is thinking about those tech issues, because hybrid is going to put ultra pressure on tech. So I think.
So for those who are watching us, please make sure to introduce yourself and give us a question. Send us to the comments area if you have any question. Okay, so I'm excited now.
Yes, so let's go ahead and jump in, shall we? All right.
Yes.
Cool. So why don't you start us off, James, by just explaining how it's been for you and exactly how was that shift? How was that shift from virtual to hybrid?
I was teaching online for quite a while. Then we shifted back to in-person, and then we quickly had to realize that we've got stranded students who were stuck in various different countries and things. So then it became hybrid, which meant you were teaching in person, but you also had people online as well. And then things kicked up even more, and now there is various shifts from almost 40-60 one way or the other to small amount of people online and nearly everybody in school, and of course online completely. So now I've got the entire gamut from one angle to the other, the spectrum, really. I like to call it the online spectrum because it is. And I think that's the other thing, is hybrid's a really good term for this, because hybrid can mean any combination. And I would strongly advise people, leadership, to think of this at least at the school level.
Okay. So what is it, James, what do they need to consider when going back in person or going back to the classroom? So for example, the number of students, how do we divide it into half? So
I think that there's a few things. Firstly, you need to be communicating with your parents as you plan to go back into school, because you need to know as soon as possible, the numbers of students that are going to come into school, the number of students that would want to stay online or need to stay online. And I think we mustn't forget that we need to be sympathetic for students and parents who are rightly concerned about the issue. I don't think anybody at the moment can claim to be completely danger-free. I will say that our students have been very good at wearing masks, but asking younger students or asking students to socially distance is a real challenge. I mean, I think that is going to be a challenge, and
Yes.
I think we need to be realistic. But if you've got numbers, also think to yourself, if you're primary school, I would strongly suggest, so if you've got younger students where you have every teacher teaching the same thing effectively, split your classes. It is much, much easier for a teacher to be wholly online or wholly in person.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there are parents who are scared of sending their kids to school. For example, in my
Precisely.
case,
So what you do is, if you say, I'm going to make this easy because I want my maths to be easy. Let's say you've got 4 classes, and let's say you've got 25%. This is a great math lesson now. Say you've got 25% who want to be online. Well, at that point, you took one of the teachers online, and the other 3 stay offline and in person. And I would say, even if your numbers aren't quite there, it is better to have one person fully online and the other teachers, or if it's 50-50, the 2 teachers, even if it means your other class is going to have to be bigger.
Yeah.
But then you've got the problem of distancing in your classroom, right?
Yeah.
Right. We in high school, we don't have the luxury of having just, set cohorts to come, and we're with those kids for 3 hours, and then the next wave comes in. We have different, periods. And so I know right now a lot of our educators are kind of nervous because in a given morning, even though we are splitting, we're doing, half our class in the morning and half our class in the afternoon. When we go hybrid in a few weeks, most likely, we are nervous about that. How are we going to clean in between classes, and is it going to be safe, and how do we keep the kids safe? Because a lot of our teachers are getting vaccinated. But
there are a couple of things you can do. Also think about your school day. Okay. One of the things we're trying to do when we take all the students back is we are crunching all the teaching time into a morning and getting rid of pretty much all the breaks, but we're giving travel time. So the kids have got time to travel between lessons. And I think you do have to be realistic about how much time you can have in the classroom. So I don't think that traditionalist, and I had a really good talk by Adam, who's in the chat, and what he was saying was asymmetric learning is a really powerful thing. So what you can do is deliver the core content, perhaps in a reduced school day, and then the asymmetric part can happen online.
Yeah.
So
no, that's not a bad idea.
So try to think about that flexibility, because what you don't want is giving kids a long time to socialize with each other. You have to get rid of those breaks. But also you don't want the kids sat in a classroom for 4, 5, 6 hours like they might normally be, but spread out over a day. So if you can get it into 3 1-hour classes and then say, but actually we're going to set you a bit of homework. Okay.
Yeah.
The other thing is, because I teach secondary, so some of my classes would be hybrid. Some of my classes would be fully online. Some of my classes would be fully in person. And it is literally a full online spectrum.
Yeah. So that brings us to a question, actually, that Sethi put in the chat here. He says, do some subjects lend themselves better to hybrid teaching? Do you see a strong case for one or the other? So what do you guys think? Do you think some classes, some courses lend themselves better to hybrid teaching in that reality of like, you could really do like that flipped type learning, blended learning?
I think everybody who's had to go online learning has learned to adapt their class for online learning. And so basically, in terms of materials, you need to make sure everything is online so that it is available. And the problem, and we're probably going to come to that later with equity, if every student doesn't have a device, then you need those classes to be fully in person. So I think that nobody's going to lie to you and say there's challenges. I wouldn't say it's subject. I would say it's what can you put online. Now, there are some subjects, of course, which are more difficult than others, but I've been really impressed with sports departments, for instance, how they've created in-house and exercises and things like that. So some of the subjects we didn't think were going to be possible online, they've done an incredible job. And I've got to take my hats off to all those people who've made sports videos and really made the effort, for instance, for that. Art is another subject. I've been so impressed with art teachers who've managed to say, well, get stuff from home and just take a picture. Because, you know, the one device most people have around the house is a phone. And that phone could take a picture of the art, right? So I've been so impressed. So I don't think it's a case of subjects, but I think it's a case of activities. Certain activities can be done online and certain activities we want to do. But I think over the last 6 months, I think most teachers have worked out which activities can be done online. Now, there are limitations. For example, if you are using Zoom, even with a really nice laptop, like I've got a decent laptop, I would say it is almost impossible to do Zoom and Apple TV at the same time because it just gobbles way too much bandwidth. And I think that is a super challenge. So I get around that by using Nearpod or Pear Deck. And I think using those tools that we'll be using online for presentations are important. And actually, because we want safety, you want everything to be around that student's screen. You don't want anything where kids have to gather around a board.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, Nearpod, Pear Deck, Padlet, Flipgrid, they allow for collaboration that can't really happen the same way with the social distancing issue, right? And so it is, that kind of brings me to this next question, this next kind of idea that popped up. Like, there's always this idea of equity that we need to like consider when we're talking about all learners, right? We want to cater the learning to all learners. How should individuals consider both the online and the face-to-face learners at the same time?
Right
like
now.
How do we manage equity?
Give up any notion of equity, okay? You are not going to be able to deliver it because they're already two different formats, okay? And they are choices, okay? Now, some parents, I would say, don't beat yourself up as a teacher. You're going to deliver what you can deliver, okay? Now, there are a few things that you can do to help with the equity, to give that. And I think members of leadership have to benefit the school day. So what I would say is that what you have is the opportunity. Firstly, you've got to make sure that all of the teachers have really good internet. And teachers basically need probably 2 devices, realistically, if you're to deliver a good experience. Because one device has to be delivering the online experience, and very few devices are powerful enough to deliver the online Zoom experience and deliver in-person PowerPoints and everything else that you might want.
Yeah.
So you've got to either, and you know, your webcam isn't that good, say, on your laptop, but probably on your phone is much better.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's tech considerations. And I love the comment that Jeff put into the chat. He said, you won't be able to deliver it if it is all Sage on the stage teaching or lecturing. And I think that that's a really great point. And I think a lot of educators have figured that out with virtual teaching, right? That Sage on the stage isn't going to fly anymore, you know, like creating those experience where you can come along and kind of give more independence and, you know, really invite the students to be co-creators of knowledge in the experience. And take some ownership really will enhance the experience, I think. I had an educator yesterday as we were talking about what hybrid learning will look like, talked about how, you know, one of the reasons why there's this big push to get back into the classroom before maybe it's safe, right? Is this idea that like kids are suffering. They need that collaborative kind of connection with their peers. And he said, you know, that it was an interesting point he made. He said, the people that are face-to-face in class, they're going to have that. Those that have to stay home for whatever reason and stay virtual or in full distance learning, you know, whether it's a parent's choice, a medical choice, you know, something else going on in their life, they're the ones that aren't. And so teach to those learners. cater to those learners, you know? So what do you guys think?
I also think if you want to deliver equity, and if a school at a school level is serious about equity, they will split the classes. They will not do hybrid. Hybrid is always going to be a compromise.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you're saying, I want equity for these kids, you say, okay, we're going to allocate this one teacher or this 1 hour, this teaching load for this time. But what you can do is you can set up the Zoom classrooms, but also set up Zoom for the kids in the classrooms and give the kids in your classroom some responsibility for helping to manage. Because actually the kids in your classroom are a great resource to help the kids online. So I always set up online, and I say, I'm giving you the laptop, and I give my students the laptop so that they can follow up, they can do the partners. And I try to pick the kids that I happened, when I know them, just about everybody I know in person as well. I give it directly to the kid who I know is already a friend. Because then they're going to make sure that kid gets a good experience. And also switch the video on, get rid of all the special effects, leave that video on and listen out, and treat that kid in the laptop like a kid in your classroom. Give them an opportunity and say, do speak up, just speak up when you want to.
That's a good point.
Yeah, it's also about if you prep videos and things.
Okay.
It's really important.
I have another question. For the school administrator, what do they need to prepare when they go hybrid? Because there are a lot of concerns. The schools here in the Philippines haven't done hybrid, so what are the things that they have to take note of when implementing hybrid? So especially those who are coming into school. So what are the usual concerns or immediate concerns that you think they have to address or to address based on your experience, James?
I think it's a big challenge. Can you rephrase that again for me, Gary? Because it wasn't quite clear. Sorry. Okay. I think it's my internet.
Okay. For what do you think, or on the point of view of the school administrator, what do they have to prepare? So we have...
Okay, so administrators, they are key to this. They are the ones who can deliver this. I would say administrators, you need to change your timetables. So you need to change your timetables to get rid of breaks, to try and get it into 1 3-4 hour slot, and to make sure that kids are able to eat safely, are able to be spaced out safely, and are wearing masks. And the best way to do that is to get rid of travel time. Do everything you can to make those logistics as down as possible. Easier if you're elementary or primary because the kids go to one classroom. Okay. For secondary, where students are used to movement, and normally I would say that's a very good thing, try to think about how you can minimize that movement, how you can keep everybody together in as much of a cluster as possible so you have less changes.
Yeah.
Allocate teachers, even if it's on a lesson by lesson basis, but try to avoid hybrid. Hybrid should always be the last resort. Hybrid basically means the kids are going to watch a Zoom video, and if they're lucky, they're going to have some chat. If they're very lucky, they've got a teacher who's able to prepare everything online, and you've got every kid has a device, then that's brilliant. But if you're in a poorer school where kids do not have a device each, I would say it is much better to cut back on school time, but give quality delivery.
Yeah. I would also add, like, administrators, I think, also need to consider the fact that staff is, staff was stretched when we went virtual, right? Now we have this new layer of teaching where we're teaching, for some people, doing the simultaneous teaching two at once. And they're scared, because far it's been uncomfortable.
Yeah, I will say that I teach computer science, so I'm lucky in a way that I'm familiar with all the technology. I know what's going on. There are things I've learned. So I use Pear Deck, but you might have a preferred platform like Nearpod, Quizzes, or something else. What I would say is make sure your slides are in a format. Now, Google Slides itself or Office 365 is fine, but make sure that is available and being delivered online to the nearest screen. You don't want students straining for the board, and that needs to be delivered simultaneously. The other thing I've discovered is I am presenting into my laptop rather than presenting to the kids in front of me, because my voice is loud enough to get through the mask. And I realize my kids are patient because they understand why I'm doing that. And then if I want to get up to the board and present to that, I make sure that I treat it like a camera. So I actually talk into the camera, I look for that camera, and I look at that as an audience member. But that's something that's probably not natural to most people.
Yeah.
And it helps that I always have a student helping and pointing behind the scenes. So you definitely need to get helper students. And as I say, that's a big thing. You've got to get a helper student, you've got to allocate it. And what I would suggest is if you want to do group work, try and include those members that are remote into the individual groups. And generally speaking, I have the online group together and I have one person who's in person following through. But I stress that I'm very lucky all my students have devices.
Yeah, for sure. And that's going to be a
and
big
that
one.
makes a huge difference.
Yeah,
And most of my students are used to Google Docs, so they're happy to collaborate that way. And even before this crisis, if they wanted to collaborate with somebody across the classroom, they'd switch on Google Docs and use it and just type chat, you know what I mean? So they were fairly comfortable with that, but I think that's it. Yeah.
Nicola makes a really great point. Maintain breaks, manage them carefully. Children need to see each other. I agree. I know, like from first semester to second semester, like I mentioned, we're still virtual, and students, the desire to be with their peers is just every single day getting stronger and stronger.
You've got to balance that. You've got to balance that against the fact that there's going to be no distance. Those are the highest risk. So if I would say make the lessons fun, but just the kids were just so happy just to be back in a classroom.
Yeah, and I think that
let them have that time. And honestly, most lessons are fun. They are enjoyable if you're a good teacher, and you will enjoy it, and they will get the social value that way. But unstructured playtime where they can hug, kiss, and it's tough. And we're going to get COVID cases, so we need to do everything we can. I'm not saying you can't have fun things to do in the classroom, but what I'm saying is you can't have a playground where the kids can
just
run into each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's painful. And I know psychologically that's not great. If you're in a position as a country where you feel comfortable enough that a classroom, they can all just get together and be with each other, great. But the only country I know where I think that's okay is Singapore at the moment. And possibly Vietnam. Vietnam's looking good. Thailand, I haven't got anybody from Thailand at the moment. Changes week on week. Sometimes I think it's okay. Sometimes I'm not sure. But most countries, the reason why hybrid exists at all is because it's not safe enough to be back in school, and there is risk.
Yeah,
and I think we should still have a duty of care to minimize that risk. So
100%.
I agree with what
Safety
Nicola says in terms of giving kids break from full-on academic study. But I'd imagine most teachers, they know how to make their lessons fun. They know how to have a good time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And as I say,
that kind of sparks another question. When you make that shift for the first time, from virtual to hybrid, do you suggest that teachers and educators and even whoever else, do you suggest that they go through that like onboarding? You know what I mean? Like here's the kind of procedures,
yes,
here's the like, and how do you do that in an inviting way without it just being rule?
Well, I've got to be honest. I think before the kids come back in school, the best schools I've seen have made really high quality videos, mostly with the staff's own kids, I'll say, demonstrating and modeling exactly how kids are going to return, because it's going to be different. They're going to have to be distanced. You can't just let the kids come back in. Times have to be changed. A whole lot has got to be changed. And what we will be doing is we will be the first period we let all of the kids back. So I've been doing hybrid for a number of kids, we'll let anybody, we will be going through the rules. I don't think there's anything wrong with going through the rules and explaining things very clearly. But I would start with a video. I would start by sending those videos out to parents and students thing. And I think also, as a school, I would say it's a privilege to come back. If you do not socially distance and follow those rules, you will be sent to the online school.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And I would
clear.
Make it real clear, because you're going to have real problems with distancing. And I think you're going to have to say that repeat offenders, you're going to say, I know it's a real struggle for you to distance little Johnny or little Katie or whatever it is. I'm sorry, you're going to have to go back to distance learning. Perhaps for a few days. If you think you can then you can come back. Just remember, you're not excluding them. You're just doing this for the safety of everybody.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I'm really, I don't want to say it like this, but ultimately, each of those is a little ticking time bomb.
Yeah.
And I don't know any other way to say it, but every one of those is a vector point. They could be presenting, they could be, literally, 2% chance, right? And unfortunately, that's the way it's going to be. I know Adriana, I know her school has had some real problems, and there have been deaths of members of staff. And I think we have to be ultra careful, and that's why we have to, responsible, So we do have to go. Yeah.
Gary asked that question about administrators.
I think Adam has a good point here. And I would say that, think about equity like this. Most students will have a choice to come in or not come in. And I think you need to be clear about the quality of the offering you're giving from each of those choices. But I would say at a school level, you could deliver equity if you split the classes. But for hybrid, I'm going to say, no, that's going to be a challenge.
That pains my teacher heart to even think about not having that, inclusive environment.
And I would say leaders need to do everything possible to avoid hybrid. Hybrid is not a good thing. Okay. I think and I have to say our school have done everything they possibly can, and they've got it all the way up to Key Stage 3, so all the way up to 14, they have managed to split. Okay. So students are either online or they're fully in class, and I think that's brilliant. Actually, I think for the upper teenagers, I think it's okay to some extent, because they're mature enough to deal with these things. And as I say, the things I've suggested have meant that those students who are online are having a good experience, because they're still able to talk with their friends through Zoom and those kind of things. So you can deliver equity in terms of quality of resources, quality of videos and things going out. So that is good. But you're obviously not going to be able to do attention share equity.
Sure. No, you're
just because of the very nature. But if you cut down curriculum time and you cut it down to maybe 2 to 3 hours of input, then maybe there is a possibility of a repeat session where teachers do online. So if you cut down sessions, there's a possibility that you can reschedule it. But I think that's the challenge.
Gary, did you have something to add?
No, I think you were asking earlier about a follow-up question about my question, Shannon.
Yeah. So you mentioned, administrators. What are some things they have to consider? And I think one thing that I've kind of noticed, and maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like voicing all of the details and trying to be preemptive rather than reactive to all the challenges we're going to face is going to be really important for parents. And Gary, you're a parent. I know you're not in hybrid, but I'm curious, now that we've talked about it and the consideration and what it could look like, as a parent, what would you want from an administrator prior to your students or your children returning?
Well, number one, to make sure that everyone is informed, just like what James mentioned earlier, that before they go back, they have to inform everyone. So everyone knows what to do. And then they know the consequences if they did not follow. Second, make sure that they disinfect the entire school, the rooms. They have sanitizer in place. they have they have a standard operating procedure just in
Mm,
case someone needs to go to the clinic because they feel dizzy, or because
mm,
I don't know if I think I prefer my kid to stay at home than to let them go to school with their
mm,
classmates. So these are the things that I would like to have, uh, that I'd like to be informed of by the school administrators, or the
mm,
school admin. So what is their plan basically?
Yeah, and I'm finding that, a lot of the time the plan is in flex all the time. It's
mhm,
Yes.
always changing depending on the metrics,
So,
because it's not just
mm,
one administrator's decision, right? It's like in our case, it's a full district.
yes.
mm,
We have to abide by the county health, procedures.
mm,
So, I have some empathy for those administrators who are
mm,
having to make those difficult decisions.
mm,
And I think, what from my perspective as an educator, someone in the classroom, I get nervous a little bit that so much effort and time is being put into, here's how the walking patterns at school are going to go.
mm.
These people are going to go up and these ones are going to go down over here, and
Those
here's going to be this, all of the
It
logistics.
helps, and honestly,
But I'm
I
worried though
actually I
that, like, they
actually
negate the
don't.
fact that teachers are nervous and that they
Yeah,
don't have the
yeah.
curriculum support. Like,
Mm,
how do you teach simultaneously, right? And
mm,
I think that's not a consideration for a lot of administrators, because they've
mm,
been tasked with prepping the environment.
mm,
And so I
mm,
think that as an educator, I'd like to see a lot more,
mm,
support with the
mm.
curriculum, instruction,
Yeah, yeah,
planning,
yeah.
development, delivery,
Mm.
suggestions and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, and as I say, I would stick to the practices you've learned whilst distance learning, and remember that the students will be happy enough to be in class and being able to talk to each other. And I think it's been a lot of fun, and it's just being able to have those conversations. But I still have to be 1.5 meters away from those kids, so I can't go round and check their screens like I used to. So a lot of the practice from distance learning is there, but they can have a conversation with me, real conversation, and they can talk to each other, and I think that's really, really powerful. So I think that's it. And Georgina's in
Hello.
here.
Welcome, Georgina. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Welcome,
We were
Hey guys.
we were just talking about, like the idea of, we've gone through what hybrid is. We've talked about, how do you maintain equity for those that are in person and those that are on virtual. And
Mm.
James's answer is you can't. And so, what do you think? How do you guys? I know that you guys went back and kind of have the same reality. What do you think about equity between the face-to-face learners and those that are virtual?
Yeah, I think it's a really big topic for discussion, and it's a really big need. I think we need to work really hard to make that gap less wide, right? Less big. So
Yeah,
um,
that's
it's a really big gap. Yeah. And it also depends too on, sorry, I've got cat hair, guys, apologies. Yeah, it's a little awkward to talk when you've got like cat hair in your mouth. Yeah, but on the real, it's quite difficult. It depends on broadband, what the students have at home, if they're even able to join, what are they able to participate in. Schools may actually have access to devices, hardware and software, that they've planned for, in their organization, and the students that are at home may not have access to the same thing. So how can you even make teaching and learning equitable? So it is a big topic, a big question, and we are doing our absolute best. I know I would say that choice is really important. So knowing that some students are working from Chromebook, some students are working from Android, some students are working on Apple. When you create your choice boards, you have to create them for a multitude of devices. So this is where that ed tech agility comes really big into play. You need to make sure that you're adapting your lessons. So it's almost like we have differentiation for learning styles, but we also need to take into account differentiation for device and ed tech. So I don't know if you guys covered all of that, or if you want to know some more, but let me know.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, we had a little bit of conversation, but we didn't talk about the ed tech agility. I didn't think about the fact that like people are going to be, zooming in at full distance learning or virtual. And if they're not, if you're, Gary kind of talked about this idea of if you're not one-to-one, that's going to be problematic, right? And so how do you support in that regard? And I love the idea that you brought up choice, because I think that maybe I'm wrong. I'll pose the question. I think traditionally educators struggle with this idea of maintaining control when things, and even more when things are out of control. And so what advice would you give to educators who are like, okay, great, you say choice, but then that means giving up a little bit of control. And what if things don't work well, and the lessons aren't as awesome as they've normally been, and such like that? How do you promote choice and support educators as they adopt that kind of approach?
I would actually say choice is easier in some ways, because if you prepare the Google Docs and HyperDocs, does everybody know what HyperDocs are?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you prepare things like HyperDocs in advance, they're great for student pacing, but they're also great in class.
Yes.
So I would say things like HyperDocs, they're relatively low tech, they don't require a lot of bandwidth, and they allow student pacing. So if you prepare that kind of document and that kind of deal, then you do get a sense of equity. And I do think you can deliver a very high standard of equity in terms of material delivery. But in terms of teacher attention, that I don't think is possible. So I would say things like HyperDocs, videos, materials like that, they can all be delivered, and they can be just as effective in hybrid. So that should make sense. What do you think, Gina? Do you think that's probably fair?
No, I think that's really, really awesome. Shannon's back, yay!
Sorry.
I think that's really, no, that's okay. I think it's really, really important, and not just the fact of having digital choices. When I say talk about choice, I'm talking about big picture, literally whatever you have access to, make it work. So we're helping students say, right, this is what I can do. I have a notebook and pencil today. My brother's using my laptop, or my sister's using my phone, so I have no tech. You need to make sure your options are blended, so across the board, not just devices. And then when they have access to tech later, they can either photograph their work, or they can screen record it, or make a video with selfies holding up their work to show. There's so many options, and we just have to, I really like what Shannon said about letting go of the control. It doesn't have to be XYZ just because that's what everybody said it is, right? This is the abnormal, and we need to get creative, and we need to give as much choice as possible. I'll tell you right now, your students will surprise you if you just give them space to create. Tell them, go find whatever you have. This is the whole thing about ideation, right? And design thinking. Use whatever you have access to. Show me your learning, share your learning, collaborate with others, and let's make it big. That's how you do it.
Absolutely. And if you make it asymmetric, if you do have a situation, say, where two brothers or a brother and sister, they have to share a laptop, they can take it in turns, and I think, as I say, we shouldn't consider this 4-hour or 5-hour school day to be sacrosanct. If we have younger students and we can't safely let them play for break, shorten the school day and let them play with a smaller subset or a bubble. I'm not saying 4 hours or 5 hours of a school day if that's too much for the younger kids, and I completely understand it is. You shorten it and say, but we're going to give you some activities afterwards. I would say 2.5 hours is probably enough for them to be in school 4 lessons to get some core input. Then the rest can be done asynchronously. And if they don't have technology, you can give out paper, good old paper. So this is an opportunity for school leaders to really look it through. And I really understand what I think it was Maureen was saying, that kids need breaks. Absolutely. I understand they can't sit for 5 hours without a break. But what I'm saying is it's probably not safe to do so if you need hybrid learning. And I think that's really important. So what I'm saying is, if it's not safe, then don't do it, but don't do a full school day. Do half a day in school, give the other half as a little bit of perhaps work, but then give them a chance to run out and do exercise, you know.
Okay.
And maybe the option is, you know, the PE teachers or the primary teachers do formal exercise where they are distanced, and I've seen that, and it's been very effective.
Yeah.
You know,
I
to
think
give.
also, oh,
Gary wanted to add something. I just want to give him the platform
Uh,
first.
uh, I would
Gary.
like to, since Georgina is part of the admin, I'd like to ask her what are the things that they have advice for a school administrator, the things they have to take note of before they implement hybrid or, whatever, usually hybrid. So, what are the things that you have to do first before you let the students go back inside the classroom?
Yeah, so this is a really good question too. There's loads and loads of protocols. So as far as like health and safety go, that's not my particular area of expertise, but happy to share some things that have gone on. So definitely want to make sure that your spaces and your sizes are distanced appropriately. So administrations need to take into account the numbers that they have in their classes. And obviously it will abide by the Ministry of Education rules, at least it does here in Jordan. So whatever they give us, this is what we have to abide by. And so sometimes it does mean splitting the classes up. So to, think outside the box and how can we get everybody in since we were back in person for a while, is have some students in the classroom and some students outside in the hall space. And that makes it really difficult as far as equity goes, because how can they collaborate with the students in the class? How can they see the smart board, et cetera, et cetera. So you just be innovative a little bit. It doesn't always work, but I've seen teachers put like laptops outside in the hall for the students that are outside in the hall, and they're streaming the whiteboard through the laptop so they can have access to the instruction that way. And then the teacher can walk between the class and switch the students. It's not always the same students that are in the hall as well. So a couple of ideas there. As far as other health and safety, make sure there's sanitizer everywhere as much as you can. I guess that goes without saying, really. Also, you need to take into consideration your buses. So you're not going to be able to fit everybody into the same bus. So you need to leave an extra seat. But again, that's dependent on region and rules and whatever your school is by, but at least it's a point to keep in mind, is that you need to have space. Here in where we are in Jordan, there are laws on how many people can be on a bus at a time, so we have to allow for that. That means that the buses are rolling in at different times. We've been lucky, and some students are still choosing to learn at home, so we haven't had too much of a difficulty with that, but it's something to consider. And also break times. You want to make sure, like, we're keeping our year groups and grades in the same pod, and so that there's less interaction. So if they need to have language lessons, if they need to have music lessons, these lessons are still online. So students are receiving those lessons digitally through their classroom. They basically don't move from the classroom except when it's time to go out for break. So that may or may not work for your school. Again, you have to see what works best, and it is got the safety of your students at heart always. But those are some things that might help you in considering. So buses, class sizes, sanitation, and making sure that your protocols are written well. So we are really blessed with a wonderful principal at our school who's created and revamps it with the senior leadership team all the time, a slide deck. It's actually a choose your own adventure slide deck. And if X happens, you go here and you get this information and you have to contact this person. And if Y happens, you need to do this and you need to let these people know. And if you're in contact with these people, you need to quarantine for this much time and you need to let these people know. If you're a working parent and your children are being sent home for quarantine purposes, then you need to do X, Y, Z because you also have classes. So it's making sure that you're working together with your leadership team to literally brainstorm every possible solution problem and see what the solutions could be for those. Does that help a little bit, Gary? Do you want some more?
Yes,
I don't want to take all the floor.
Yeah, it's okay. Actually, I got bothered because here in the Philippines, not all schools have a big waiting area because usually they are being picked up by their parents. So that will be a big concern in some of the schools here because when it's time to go home, they all flock in one area. Now we cannot do that. So that will be a good thing to consider, especially for the school admin. If it's dismissal time, where do they stay, and how do they know that their they're being fetched or their parents are there to fetch them?
So for that one, what we do is the students stay in the school and they have to have their mobile phones with them from years 2. Don't quote me, possibly years 3 and up. So that would be like grade 4 and up, Shannon, in your neck of the woods, we could say. So they stay in the school, and when they get a message from mom or dad on Signal or WhatsApp or whatever it is, they can show the teacher that they have at the end of the day, and then they can be released to the gate. That way it slows down any waiting spaces. And then also for the younger ones, they release in pods. So normally where we had like a parking lot, it's been like gated off with a canopy since there is sunshine here in the Middle East, and so they wait in rows to be picked up by their parents. But you're right, it is a concern, and you know, the schools, if we're fair to the administrators and the countries and the cities, they didn't build schools for this, right? So
No,
our classrooms are not built for all this space.
I've added it in the chat, but Singapore American School has a really good guide. Plus, there's a more formal guide from India. Both of them, I think, are places to start. But the Singapore American School, very accessible, really well read, and public on the internet. So I would have a look at that, and I think it's good to see what other schools are doing and how they're doing. Hopefully, your principals are talking to other people in their districts and states and really collaborating. Also, if you have sister schools and districts, the bigger the better, because the bigger the number of students, the bigger the number of teachers, the more likely it is you're going to be able to have a decent split between online and in classroom. And when we're talking about hybrid, we really are talking about simultaneously teaching both, rather than hybrid as in having some students at home and some don't. And we would say the best provision is definitely going to be having separate classes for online and offline.
I kind of want to wrap us up with, so we've talked about, you know, the safety protocols, the processes, the procedures, all of that. We've kind of talked about equity. And so parents have been covered, and administrators have been covered, and educators have been covered. I want to kind of shift our focus to students a little bit. So when we ask them to make all of these shifts, they've been amazing, right? We like shout out to the kids who are like just doing it, right? But the reality is there's always going to be a struggle with any type of change, right? Change brings about uncertainty. And so one big conversation that's happening, you know, is this idea of integrating like explicit social emotional learning lessons within the classroom. And, you know, I appreciate Nicola in the chat because she mentioned resilience. So if you had to give suggestions to educators, those you work with, yourself, whatever it may be, how important is social emotional learning in the classroom in this shift? And how would you potentially go about, you know, integrating some lessons or some ideas there?
Wow, good question. I think
a good question.
It's critical. It's absolutely critical. And I think we have to deal with it like any other crisis situation. And we have to be really aware that students are going to be in very, very different places to each other. And I think teachers also have to take care of each other, you know, because the pressure is on absolutely everybody. And everybody's got their pressure points. And I think there was one very, very insensitive article in the UK saying teachers should be expected to die. And that was by a former head of the Inspection Bureau called Ofsted, who are hated to begin with. But this guy literally saying, well, we expect teachers to sacrifice their lives. That is tough. It was a very tough message. And it reminds us that we do all have to be careful and do our part. And I know teachers, some people are saying, well, the well-being of the kids comes first. But I think we have to say that, you know, we've survived for thousands of years without formal education, okay? So if education is disrupted for a year or two, I think that's a much lesser consequence than, you know, serious issues. So I think we should try to think about safety and try to build that way. And I think, yeah, I would rather prioritize education even over computer science lessons.
Aw, James.
I mean, I know I would never normally say that, but first priority is for my students to be happy and to feel safe, always. And if that means I cover a little less content, that's okay. They'll go home, they'll do it. You know what I mean?
I was going to add to that and say, isn't it Maslow who said, and correct me if I've got the wrong, you know.
Yeah, but I'm going to feel it.
Okay.
Maslow before Bloom's, right? I don't think he said it, but it's properly.
One of them, correct me who it is, but said that, we need to be happy, and we know we're all, expert educators. We all know that students don't learn unless they're happy. So if we don't put self first, there is no content going anywhere except out the door.
Yeah.
That's my bottom line.
And if you're not feeling secure, you're not going to learn anything anyway. You as I say, the phrase on Twitter that's really popular, and I don't know who said it first exactly, is Maslow before Bloom's. If I'll give you another simple example from England. I don't see the reason why, and I'm sorry, a little bit political here. I don't see why we don't give every kid a school lunch and a school breakfast, because that will make the biggest learning difference of anything you can dream up. Why bother asking questions? So what if a few middle-class kids who don't absolutely need it get a free school lunch? I'd rather have that and give real equity. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's where that idea came from. Yeah.
Physiological needs met, so the hunger, safety, all of warmth, all that, and then safety, and then we keep going, up and moving towards self-actualization. Yeah. So I think you're spot on, Georgina, and everybody else in this chat. We all agree. I think though that sometimes you guys brought up a really great point of this idea that, what about my curriculum? My curriculum's going to suffer. It's already suffered. There's this huge conversation about learning loss, and I think
not in computer science. My kids are ahead. I don't need to worry about it. I know I just said all that about heart, but actually my kids are ahead. So I can afford to. You know what I mean?
But my point is this. My point is, I think people use that sometimes because they don't know the first step to start integrating social emotional learning. And so I think it's beneficial to talk about, though, how do you model resilience? How are you modeling grit? How are you modeling this idea of, using a challenge to propel yourself forward versus getting bogged down or stuck? How do we support parents in that process as well? I know a lot of parents are like, my kids, it's so hard to see my kids so upset at home, right? Because they don't have that connection. So how are we coming alongside the other stakeholders, right, to really support that?
I think also there is a lot of things going on, right? It's and I do think we mustn't forget that the original Flips Learning was a book. That piece of technology is incredibly powerful. The ability to print, the ability to send things to us, that's a great equalizer. And so there are always opportunities for students to learn once we've got them feeling safe and happy and responsible. And honestly, the reason my kids are ahead, a lot of my students are ahead, is because they've got something nice to do with computer science. They have something, they have some programming, they have something to do. And actually, your subject can feed into their well-being. You know what I mean? I wrote a program because I didn't want to stop doing things. I want, especially in the beginning stages. So I wrote some code and I wrote some things. And I feel the same with a lot of my students. They wanted to do something. They wanted to feel useful. And, if you have a good, engaging subject, then your kids will actually do more of it at home rather than less. And I have to say, I have an example of one kid, completely optional, right? Did an extra 60 hours on top of the stuff that they're supposed to do. There was no exam at the end of it. There was nothing. It was pure voluntary. I had no control over it. But the point is, as teachers, sometimes the work is the emotional comfort, the emotional norm. Seeing your teacher can be that thing that brings a little bit of normality, even if it's through a Zoom call. So I think, definitely Maslow before things, but don't underestimate the fact that emotional well-being can come from seeing your teacher, from doing normal-ish work.
I wanted to say, sorry, Gary, did you want to go first?
Go ahead.
Okay. I wanted to add to that, James, because, you wrote this wonderful book on gamification and even talking about user profiles. So I really enjoyed doing that activity again during this week, and having learners be able to connect to like superheroes and ask them, how does the superhero feel and how do you feel? Just finding different ways to be able to help students connect to their feelings through the regular work. So like James did that in a computer science lesson with user profiles. So, how could we take that and adapt? So I had, I teach a couple of creative media lessons as well at the school that I'm working at now, as do all the leaders. And actually, I just shared this with Shaman too the other week. So we're doing something called BioCon, where students are designing the icons to represent their biography. And it really helped one student really express themselves as far as well-being. The icons that they were designing over the last month and a half, you can just see how they're feeling and how their journey is developing through these times. So I think you're right. I think if we provide creative opportunities, take the curriculum and tie it into well-being, it doesn't mean it has to be extra lessons. It's just catering to the needs, and the needs are the students right now. They're sad. They're so sad. We need to be there for them, for each other.
Then we have to be there for them.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's real good. And I love that idea. I think you guys hit the nail on the head. The idea that, so many educators are so worried about like, well, I don't have time. Well, yeah, okay, fine. Build it into your curriculum. Make it a part of, it's as simple as give them opportunity to reflect, give them opportunity to be metacognitive, like work those into the lessons, and you'll find that, you're kind of teaching those skills along the way. So I think that's wonderful. All right. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, she reminded me of a resource that I've seen called Drawing for Wellbeing. And I think drawing is often a powerful way, however you do it, of, expressing your emotions. And same with music and the other creative arts. Whatever we can do that a student will relate to, and drama and all of those things, and role play, all of those are incredibly powerful ways to express emotions for kids who might not otherwise express them.
Yeah, and for parents at home, like board games.
Go ahead.
Like board games, like get out your board games with your kids, even if they've never played, because you also have a PlayStation and an Xbox. It doesn't matter. Like just switch things up, get them connecting with different. It's about the blended space, right? So not every child is going to be able to connect verbally. Not every child is going to be able to connect visually. But if you give them different spaces and different ways, they'll connect with something eventually. Or ask them, just make sure you're constantly creating those spaces for them and vary it up. If something doesn't work, just keep trying until you find something that does.
I mean, I've been surprised, actually. There's a body of research for gaming showing that actually it's been tremendously beneficial for those people and their psychology, because it's a form of escapism. But also, these days, it's a very social game. You don't have to play on your own. You can play with your friends and all of that. And for many kids, that is their main social contact. I mean, I have to say, I've got some students who are very happy to continue distance learning and are in no rush to come back whatsoever. So, you've got a full selection.
That's another point, that some students actually thrived in distance learning, and those who were thriving in person, some of them are suffering now in online learning. And it's how do we support both ends of that? How do we take the silver lining from distance learning when we go back to in person? What are we doing right now to support those who are really struggling, missing their friends and their colleagues? So
absolutely. Yeah, so we're coming to the end of our show here. And Nicola, I don't want to go on without, pointing out what she said here. Children in schools now are not a lost generation. They're learning to do things differently, and there are many benefits alongside the challenges. And that is the hope, right? That we are shifting and evolving and innovating and creating. And, we have this idea that students are like, we're going to go back to the idea of they're losing out. But in a lot of ways, they're figuring out other things. They're developing other strengths that will prepare them for future industry, right? So my
Yeah.
last question, we're going to do a quick whip around, and then and I'll end and I'll close it out here. But I'd like to know, and this isn't pointed, it's just open and broad. What is one general piece of advice that you would like to give to those that are either currently watching or going to be watching on the replay? Let's start with Georgina. What's a piece of advice you'd like to give?
I looked to the side. I was like, "Oh, I'm not ready yet," and then she picked me anyway. Okay.
I
All
saw
right.
the side eye. I knew. Go ahead.
Okay, my top three, I know you said one, but number one is physical care. Okay, like I recently put my back out because I know that I'm sitting a lot and I haven't been getting out to exercise as much. You need to get up and move. If it means setting a timer on your watch or on your phone to get up every 20, 30 minutes, it's important. Go walk around the house if that's all you can do. Do some push-ups. I'm too weak to do a push-up, so I'm like working. I'm on modified like push-ups right now on my knees, but get back into it and just keep yourself moving. And the other thing is try to hone in, if you can, on what it is that you're really struggling with in your normal. Everybody has a different normal now, right? But whatever your normal is, whatever you're struggling with, make sure that you put that in. So I lost sense of time during distance learning. So I had to be super mindful of keying in even my personal time, my writing time into my calendar, whereas previously it was just the work events, right? But now I'm being very mindful of my well-being as well. So yeah, that's my little tips, advice.
Awesome. Physical care and being mindful, the things you lost during the time. Yeah, time being a huge one. James?
I just think in terms of hybrid, plan for the distance learning first, okay? Because the kids will be happy to be in class. So plan it as if you're planning a distance learning lesson, and then everything that you add on top is great for the classroom. And I think that will take the stress away for a lot of teachers, because I can see that's going to be a crunch for a lot of teachers. And yeah, that's my main thing.
That's a great piece of advice. Thanks. And Gary?
Mine is communicate with the school admin, communicate so you can help by suggesting things that there are parents who are doctors, who are experts in some field of safety. So communicate with the school so they can make their policy or the things that they will implement better because of the collaborative effort of everyone, and follow and cooperate.
Yes,
Okay.
I love that. Communication and cooperation, it's very important. My final piece of advice to everybody would be really, truly draw upon your PLN for support, not only for curricular support, but also for emotional support, because the world is wide and there's so much out there for this. I want to reiterate, if you're on Twitter, EduTwitter, #hybrid learning. There are so many great resources that are being put out. So many great articles, research, books being posted there. So check it out. And also, you're not alone in this. We're all kind of walking through this together. And so understand that, reach out and, do your best not to, because of the challenge, revert to isolation, because isolation is just going to make it that much harder. So yeah, I just want to thank our viewers today and those of you that participated in the chat. It was great to get your insight and your shares, and we look forward to seeing you in a month on the first Thursday of April. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you very much.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.